some reason Praveen's in as an attendee. Let me promote him.
All right, we appear to have a quorum, so we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Thank you all for being here this afternoon, evening, making time. Just very quick introductory comments before I'll have Beth take attendance and then move into the presentation. This is in preparation for a work session jointly between the ATC board and the City Council, which is really a wonderful thing because in the time I've been in Alexandria, we've never had a joint work session between both groups. Josh is going to, and his team will run through the presentation. I myself have not seen it yet. We had a very high level conversation earlier in the summer about kind of making sure we were on the same page as to what the objectives are. And I know Josh has been in contact with the city manager and the mayor's office as well to kind of ensure this is a good session. We're having a run through because it's important that we all as board members, we're very part-time and we've been away from this through the summer. It's important that we all know the information that we're dealing with. We have some significant challenges that Dash is going to have to address, and we're going to need input from the city. And as Josh has told me, it's their intention to be agnostic in terms of recommendations, to lay out the information and let those who are elected, the council, and those who are appointed, us to work through what the best course of action is. But we need to all have the same information, and we don't want to have any surprises when we get together next week among our group. So this is an opportunity to make sure, are we presenting the information correctly? Do we understand the information? And is there anything that is missing for us to come to, next steps? It is not the intention that our board necessarily agree on what the course of action is. In fact, I'm sure there's going to be areas in which we're going to have disagreements, and Josh is built into the session opportunities for folks to be able to speak their mind and try to explain what their positions are. We don't need to have a unified position. Where people come from different backgrounds, different constituencies within the city, and that's expected. And the council will too likely have different opinions about how we go forward. We want to make sure we're all operating on the same page. And so that's the purpose of tonight. So I wanted just to set the table there and welcome all of you back. I hope you had a great summer and look forward to seeing you in person next week. And I'll ask Beth to call the roll.
Chair Kaplan.
Here.
Arish Gudger.
I'm here.
Matt Harris.
Here.
Praveen Kathpal.
Here.
Jesse O'Connell.
Here.
Hillary Orr. Kirsten Faust.
Here.
Laura Gates.
Here.
Ajay Thomas. Arthur Wicks.
Here.
Chair Kaplan, you have a quorum. Those absent, it's just Ajay Thomas.
Thank you. Thank you, Beth. I'll turn this over to Josh and his team for the balance of the meeting.
Thank you, Chair Kaplan. Good to see everybody. Welcome to this hopefully quick session with you. I think our chairman did a great job of outlining the intention of the conversation here this evening. But before I get into sort of running through the outline with you, I want to make sure to introduce some Dash staff that are here to help answer any questions as we go through this. Raymond Mui, Stephanie Salzone, Yvonne Jung, and Edward Ryder are all here. And we also have a guest, Finn Vigeland is on, and Finn is with Foursquare ITP. Finn has been helping us to think a little bit about the way that we go about this work session, and we brought them on board to help us parse through the recommendations that might come out of this conversation in a way that can set a path forward for Dash and for City Council to figure out what, if any, next steps are necessary in making some decisions and potentially revising our strategic goals or any other things that might come out of these discussions. As we all know, Martin Barna left Dash in the spring, well, I guess technically in the summer. He's promised to come back and say hello, and we're still in touch with him, but he's quite busy also on the consulting side. But the other thing that's exciting about Finn and his team is that they are also very heavily involved regionally with the work around the regional coordination and the work that is being done with DMV Moves and the various other efforts to understand how regional transit occurs in DC, and also the funding mechanisms associated with it, which I think are an important part of the discussion. So that's why you see Finn on the screen. He's here to take some notes, and then we'll obviously, as staff, debrief tomorrow following this discussion to get an understanding of what we might need to tweak or bring into the conversation to make sure that the joint work session is productive. At this time, it is my impression that our agenda is largely the agenda for this work session. There has not been a definitive agenda coming from the city side, and we do not anticipate any sort of major presentation from the city manager. But the hope, in my view, of this work session is that it is very conversational in nature and provides a lot of opportunity for the bodies to discuss priorities and strategies, and to make sure that what we're doing as staff is well guided and aligned with the expectations of the bodies. We will intend to highlight some of the areas pretty clearly where there is alignment between DASH goals and priorities and city goals and priorities. And then we will also attempt to highlight areas where there might be differences. So I'll run through that briefly here in a few minutes, but that's essentially the intent. What we would like to do this evening is you can talk about it as we go through, or we can talk about it sort of at the end if there are things that you want us to bring to the table or not bring to the table that are important for you. So with that said, I'll notate that the agenda that was sent out to you includes an outline, and you'll have to bear with me for a moment because I have to do this juggling process here with the uniqueness of this meeting. Just a moment to switch my share. All right, did that update on your side? This should be the same agenda that you all received. So this is the agenda that we outlined and sort of the process. So I'm just going to run through these very quickly and help you all understand the intention behind them. We do have some slides and visuals put together. It was not my intention to spend a lot of time on them this evening. I'm happy to put them up on the screen and run through them for you, but my intention was more to have a discussion here, refine those, and then have that real data information clear and on the screen for everyone when we get to the meeting. It's my intention that I'll present this information to both bodies, welcome the city manager to be a part of that conversation. We'd love to run through sort of the overview and then head into a conversation and Q&A. We will also solicit the group for some feedback on discussion points and things that they would like to make sure we cover at some point during the meeting early on. But we're going to start out, obviously, just real quick highlight of DASH. I think everyone who's going to be there knows what DASH is, knows how we're formed, and understands the structure of the organization. But it is important in work like this just to make sure that we revisit that and understand the governance structure of our organization and why it exists the way that it does. Then we'll jump into the strategic goals. So what we're going to do here is talk about, on our side, the Alexandria Transit Vision Plan, which is very much informing many of the decisions and goals that we have as far as our service provisions are concerned. We're going to talk also about the dashboard strategic plan, which we know is going to be due to be updated this year, or at least revisited. And I think that this is a great opportunity to revisit what those goals are, explain them to City Council, and make sure they understand why we have them. And then to solicit any feedback if we need to consider tweaking those, because that will be a great opportunity for us to work on that as staff in the coming year. City Council priorities will be highlighted here as well. And quite importantly, the new DASH network, which is informed by the ATV. And I'll talk here in a minute kind of how that's all going to play out. Then the Alexandria Transit Strategic Plan, we're going to do a quick summary of that. That basically, as you all know, has taken the place of the TDP, which is a much more complex document and more annual operating type budget document for us. But we want to make sure everyone understands the purpose of it. And then last in this section, I think quite importantly, it's going to be a robust conversation around zero emission bus, the transition plan that exists for that, our current goal of 2037. And we're going to come forward with some ideas of ways that there could be a conversation around this as it relates to our ZEB plan, as well as state of good repair, and some possible ways that this could move forward. On the service planning side, again, talking about the ATV, obviously adopted in 2019, the new Dash network implementation began in 2021, highlighting the effects of that and where we are currently compared to the timeline. And I think it will be important here to highlight that we are not on track for the 2030 ATV network in the original timeframe called for by the ATV. Additionally, we have not fully implemented the 2022 service improvements. So we're 3 years, going on 3 years behind. Again, important discussion item. We'll have some strategies about how that's going to be parsed through for both bodies, but we want to have a discussion around, should Dash reconsider the timeline of the ATV? Is it still the appropriate guiding document? Do the parties want to see a review and revisit of that, considering any changes that have occurred? And also, although it's not a major part of this conversation, it's on everyone's mind, the issue around school pupil transportation and the opportunity that we've been working through with the city leadership to try to find ways to make Dash a viable solution for some of the challenges they might be experiencing. So we'll have some information there. On the then we're going to talk a little bit about the operating budget. We're going to have some graphics here that are going to help show the projected Dash operating costs coming from the TSP, and what that growth looks like with no service increases. We have every year when we go through the budget process, we talk about current services. I always say, as transit providers, we have to show up tomorrow the same way we showed up today. That is critical. People live their lives and depend on us to be there. And if we can't do that, we're failing at our mission fundamentally. So what are the impacts of the cost increases absent of any additional investments or expansion of service? And then what are the costs associated with the ATV implementation? And how far apart are they? Getting the parties to understand what those look like. For our city staff, Art and Laura, we've worked to try to make some assumptions around city's growth, budget growth over time. We'd love some feedback on that. But, sort of going very conservatively around this 2% mark where you all have basically been, and I think is probably a more normal growth. Again, that can be a part of the discussion. And we can say, you know what? That's not an expectation, or it shouldn't be an expectation. Staff should not be considering that, or they should. And that helps to provide us with some guidance as how we move forward from the conversation. We're going to highlight basically some of the sustaining initiatives supported by outside funding, the Fare Free program, highlighting our I-395 commuter choice funding. That's something I'm not sure that the bodies fully always recognize or see. We've been very, very fortunate, but it has a huge impact on Alexandria and Dash, and it is not a guaranteed source of funding. Although we work really hard to make sure it doesn't go away, I think it will be important, if nothing else, just for awareness of the bodies to know what the potential impacts are around I-395 commuter choice. Here we'll also talk, when we're here in this operating budget number 4, I'll highlight it, is the rising cost of labor. We're going to be going into CBA negotiations this fall. In fact, the timeline has us starting in October. Knock on wood, we can stick with that timeline. And that is important because the collective bargaining process needs to be aligned with the city's budget process. And that's something that we worked very hard to do the last time around, and we're going to be for the first time. But again, those costs come into play as well. And then we also want to talk a little bit about just sort of, again, going back to the state of good repair conversation here. Once we acquire the asset, we have an operating cost of that asset. And we've been doing a little bit of analysis to understand the relative operating costs of our diesel fleet as compared to our electric fleet. And more importantly than that, the effect that inflation and tariffs are having on our operating, because it's significant. And while we don't have robust information around that right now, we'd like to understand whether council and the board want us to focus a lot on that, and in what way, and how to bring that forward. So there'll be some conversation there around that. Capital fleet, item 5 here. So this is a brief discussion around fleet replacement versus expansion, and just helping to make sure everyone understands the priorities there, and how those are funded, and how we look at them from a CIP perspective. Mentioning the fact here that buses have a 12-year lifespan. And I think it's important, and we heard in the discussion in the spring from the board members, questions around, hey, are we talking about that 12-year lifespan? When we think about the CIP, when we think about the assets we're buying, the mode of propulsion, and the effect that asset will have on Dash and the city over its 12-year lifespan, I think it's just important that there's some discussion around that, and we have a dialogue around how that's playing out. We'll also talk a little bit here about the ratio of if we stick with electric and we continue to find ways to move to electric, how does that look as far as the ratio compared to the composition of today's fleet, i.e., what are the projected operating challenges potentially around those, and how are we addressing them, or how should we address them when it comes to one-for-one replacement as opposed to electric assets requiring more vehicles based on current technology, recognizing the battery technology continues to change and improve, what we might look at there. There is mention here about ACPS, just again, mentioning the fact that when you're thinking about fleet expansion, there are aspects of the 2030 ATV plan that requires expansion, and the potential that if we take on more service levels that are going to be to help assist the ACPS transportation challenges, that there is a point at which Dash does require additional assets to do that. So it falls into that expansion category. And we just want to make sure everybody understands that. Again, we may or may not be making any decisions about any of this stuff in the work session, but we want to hear what people's thoughts are about them and how we as staff can best navigate that throughout the coming year, and provide the right information for people. Fleet size, we're just going to talk a little bit about our current fleet. We're at 16 electric buses. Our target again is as stands is 100% zero emission by 2037. And sort of just helping people, we'll have some graphics to understand what that commitment looks like and what's required to accomplish that. And then the CIP fleet replacement. We want to highlight here that we don't have access to federal formula funding like other agencies. The federal formula funding that comes into this region is going to WMATA. And I think it's important to remind everybody that the city has 2 bills to pay, and the state does a great job of paying both of those bills, and for the right reasons redirects those federal funds to WMATA. It makes sense, it works, but we do need to make sure that we understand that that's happening, and that is something that we cannot rely on like traditional transit systems do, many throughout the country, who are not dealing with the unique configuration and character of the WMATA service area. We're also going to highlight secured funding versus that funding gap. This will be a lot, for based off of the conversation with Art and your team and Hillary and everybody on the city side has really been working to help us understand what we do and don't have access to as far as funds in order to continue replacing our fleet. Then we're going to talk briefly about expansion, this item here, and it is going to point out that as stands right now, we are receiving funding from the city for clean diesel, but not electric buses. And so, we are looking at how do we fill that, that gap in funding, and in what ways, and what are the discussion points around this. But at this point, the bottom line is there's no fleet expansion funding from FY 26 to 35 that is secured. And given these challenges, what do we want to revisit? What do we want to talk about? And how do we want to make sure that information is presented effectively? Non-rolling stock, we're going to highlight just briefly the dash managed versus city managed non-fleet. So what are the capital projects? Just a quick highlight. What's secured funding versus what's the gap? This includes things like the expansion of the facility, our CAT AVL upgrades, transit signal priority projects, on-route charging, access to transit via bus stops and amenities, transit ways, major transit centers, and bus shelter maintenance, ongoing maintenance costs and impacts. On the capital funding side, we're going to highlight the sources, noting that the city puts a lot of local dollars, cash capital, go bonds, TIP, and past CIP dollars into these costs. And we're going to talk a little bit about the federal funding and the state funding options that are out there and that we've leveraged in the past and what they look like going forward. And then we have a chart where we're going to talk about the funding gaps for capital. So basically, at this point, Dash needs more than 120 million over the next 10 years to fund planned capital improvements. And at this point, federal discretionary funding is uncertain in 2026 and beyond. So how do we fill this gap? Do we change our goals? Do we go unique routes? Are there things that both bodies want us to look at and want us to investigate further and report back on? And how does that look? And then we'll head into that discussion. These are, some of the ideas of things that we're going to be talking about. Again, we're going to try to make sure that this is done in a way that allows people. Obviously, I've just talked at you for the past 30 minutes, but I just wanted to download into you a little bit of what we're thinking and the approach where we're going. I want to hear from you. Hey, sounds like it's on the right track, or I didn't hear something I want to make sure I hear, or at least I want to make sure is covered in a particular section, or if there's something that you feel like, what, that's not something we should be talking about. That's not a good use of this time and this opportunity. So I welcome that feedback as well. So that's where I'm at. That's sort of what we've drafted and put together and the intention of our approach. And I'll be happy to take questions. I guess I'll just call them when they pop up on the screen. And Praveen, you popped up to the top left of my screen here, so I see you.
All right.
Go ahead.
So, yeah, Josh, thanks for that overview. I think probably one of the most important things I can say to you is like what you were just touching on, because it took you almost half an hour to tell us what you're going to tell them. On the 10th, you're going to have to actually tell them that. And to me, the measure of a good meeting will be whether you have a robust discussion. And so, if it takes 45 minutes to do the information push part of this before a discussion, and that gets sidetracked by another 20 minutes chasing stray questions that are not the strategic priority discussion that you're trying to extract from this joint body. You might not meet what I think is your success metric for this meeting, which is to have a robust discussion on this 6A, 6B, 6C. So I would just consider that in your content planning. So that's my first comment. My second one is I appreciate you told us what you're going to talk about, but I thought what we were going to do here is react to what you're actually going to say. And I think there's been a lot of time to prepare for this. Some of it is related to ongoing planning. So what I really would have loved to see regarding the electric fleet is what will it actually take to meet the goal, right? Like if we do what's in our policy, which is stop buying diesels in FY27, fully electrified by 2037, what will that take? I think it's important for the council and manager and this body to have their eyes all on that at the same time. And then I think to sort of pivot off of that to the strategic scenarios, right? One is, follow down that path, but it's going to cost more and or take longer, right? Which is basically domestic supply chain and a goal, basically pushing the goal probably back 2037 or saying that we need a lot more capital funding to meet the electric goal. I think a second strategic approach would be we're not getting federal funding, so why use domestic supply chain, right? Like cities all over the world are electrifying much faster than we are, and most of them are using Chinese buses. And that way you can talk about how the limited North American supply chain combined with tariffs is making this harder, but there is a way. So that second way might cost less and be achievable faster. I bet the council side of it, probably the manager, probably members of this body, would also be interested in a third scenario where we say the reason we're electrifying is to decarbonize. What's the equivalent decarbonization we can achieve through frequency and reliability and service? And say we'll come back to an electrification goal, but at the moment we can achieve a greater degree of decarbonization by having more transit at lower cost. Is that a strategic direction Alexandria wants to take? Like, from my perspective, that's the policy discussion to have when you have this body's attention. And kind of coming back to my first point, I would hate to be in a situation where, you spend 90 minutes getting through 1 through 5, 25 minutes on 6A, and try to squeeze 6B in the last 5 minutes and don't get the direction that you need for the team to really make the moves that are necessary, because time has run out in terms of staying on policy. So if the policy needs to change, the council needs to acknowledge that.
Thank you. That's helpful, Praveen. Jesse was up, I think, popped up next.
Gosh, this is great. And, I think the feedback that I want to share, it's running along similar lines to Praveen, which is I think everything you've outlined here is great. And I think we need to get through everything here in the course of our conversation with council. I do share Praveen's concerns that if we lead off with 45 minutes of just talking at them, we're going to lose some of them. There's going to be like questions that come up on the thing in the first 10 minutes and they forget. So I would encourage you guys to think about a structure that might look a little bit more like starting with framing like the bottom line up front, the key challenges that we need to get feedback from them on, right? Around the alignment of various strategic goals and whether we can actually meet them, the gaps in capital funding and what it would take to meet them. And I think the third thing probably would be, I'm losing my train of thought, but like start with the key things and show them like the 2 or 3 slides that are most important for them having context to understand those. and kind of get into dialogue. And then as they ask questions, you guys can be like, we have 2 slides on that. Jump to those 2 slides and talk about that in the course of answering their question and having the conversation. I wonder if that will lead to both a much more engaging dialogue throughout the course of the meeting, but also have the effect of having you guys come across as incredibly prepared, because you're doing the conversation in like 30, you're doing the whole presentation in like 30 small chunks over the course of the whole meeting by rolling forward and rolling back in the slide deck to pull up information as they're asking about it. So they're getting the context in the frame of the question that they're asking, as opposed to dumping a bunch of them at front and then getting to these things that we need their feedback and their insight on. And candidly, I see this as like, I think I'll use an I statement. I think the big goal that I have walking away from this is to have our elected members of council understand the scale of challenge that we are facing to continue delivering the transit that they all feel so positively about, right? I get a sense that they think like, this is just happening and it's going to continue to happen. And I see this meeting as our chance to help them understand that without additional investment, without additional purposeful policy choices, we really are facing a situation where we can't continue to do a lot of these awesome things that we've been doing. So I think like any framing that gets us to opening their eyes and engaging with them around, the level of kind of like commitment we need from them, that's what we're trying to walk out of here with.
That's super helpful. Thank you. Art.
Yeah, I think a lot of this is just slightly different flavors of what Praveen and Jesse have already said, but I guess maybe you covered this at the beginning, I missed it, but it might be worthwhile us all taking a second to step back and think about what the purpose of this meeting is, because if on one hand, I could see council just wanting a specific session that's in the public noticing for you to kind of list out everything that's going on and the challenges. Sometimes they like that, to say, well, we had this meeting so we could talk about this in front of the public. And that's okay. I guess the question for this group is what are we want to get out of it? And do we need to state that clearly? So like, to me, it seems like some of what could come out of the discussion should directly inform our update to the strategic plan, our strategic plan, right? If we've got some sense of where they're going with investing in Dash, that should inform that. If that's the case, we should kind of make that clear up front, so they're kind of making that connection as we have the discussion. I just, as you put it, Josh, we're here to have a robust discussion. If all council is looking for out of this is kind of a public kind of airing of the issues, that's fine. That's a productive use of time. Just I guess I bring it up to gauge how you and your staff put your effort into this, right? Is if what they want is just for us to run through this list of things and say, here's the gap, and they just understand the magnitude of the challenge at the end of it, then sounds like you're on the right track. But if you're hoping for something discrete and concrete direction out of this, then I think we might need to do a little more work with some framing questions at the beginning, or kind of constantly bringing them back to, here's what we want you to answer by the end of the night. Which is to some degree probably unrealistic with 2 bodies in a room, but just I think we should at least strive for that, if that's the objective.
Okay. Hillary.
Yeah, so again, I totally agree with everything that everybody has been saying, and what's been going through my head is like, how do you frame this in a way that you're hitting upon a lot of these points, but it's in fewer buckets? And what's jumping out at me is like, as we're thinking about framing, is like, as we think about the budget, right? There's operating and there's capital, right? So if you're thinking about what are the questions we're asking them and what are we trying to frame for them, what was coming to my mind was like, here's the status quo, and this is what that takes, right? Like if we just maintain status quo, even like cost, whatever, service, all of that, labor, it's all going up. But we also have these plans that we've said, these goals to the ATV for our service levels, BRT, all these things that we're trying to do. And here's what that takes. So it's kind of like the status quo versus the like more and enhanced. And because I feel like the same thing, you could almost use the same framework from the capital side, when you're looking at EVs, which I feel like those are the like key conversations and discussions that we want to have. It's the electrification of the fleet, right? Like here's the status quo with our fleet replacement, here's our goal, and here's what it would take to get there, like the status quo versus more. And I'm wondering if you frame it that way, if you can kind of fit a lot of the things that you have in this outline into those two buckets, but then you get a robust conversation around the things that we always bring to council, which is during budget season, do we enhance our service? And then the conversations that we're having about fleet and electrification. And the other one you could throw in here, I'm unclear about the stuff with schools and like the level we're getting into here, because it feels like there's the city school subcommittee and you guys are doing a lot on that. So I'm unclear whether we're even broaching that here or whether it's kind of like just keeping that in a separate bucket. But when I look at your outline, the big topics that seem to be council oriented are more about the fleet electrification and the service. And I think you can fit into that conversation. You can fit the strategic plan. Oh, by the way, we updated our strategic plan and here are the goals. And this is why we're doing this. It's the why around, why we're trying to do more, but also kind of giving them the picture of here's what it takes to maintain, here's what it takes to do more, because they always want to do more. That's the thing with like council always wants to do more, but they don't always want to pay for it. And so understanding those challenges, I'm just wondering if that simplifies the conversation, but still allows you to hit on a lot of the points that you have in here in a way that's a little more digestible, maybe breaking it into two parts of the meeting and allows for more discussion than kind of overview of all I mean, this is like a huge, it's great, but it's an overview of everything that like we've been talking about for the past, 3 years. So it's a lot to fit into one meeting.
Yeah, I agree. No, thank you. I mean, I think, oh, sorry, Harish.
Yeah, really quick. I mean, great feedback from everybody and agree with a lot of it. I think Josh and you may have been about to dive into this and I may have missed it at the beginning of the meeting. I wasn't 100% clear on what your thought process was regarding approach. I think there may have been an assumption that you were just going to kind of run through the agenda, but I'm not sure if that actually was your thought process. If you were just sort of thinking, these are the full range of topics that we'd ideally talk about, but start with one, how if at all, were you think about engaging council and, kind of having the discussion that I think everybody is hoping to have. So I just want to turn it back to you to clarify, if at all, whether the intent really was to try to punch through all these items or to just use them as starting points for discussion or what. And I'm sorry if I missed that earlier.
No, you didn't. Thank you. And yes, that's what I was going to kind of get at. I appreciate all of your feedback, and I will admit that this is a very important conversation for us because we don't have any of that guidance from council. We don't have any clarity of what they're expecting. We don't have, I mean, the origin of this does stem from a budget work session where the comment was made essentially about electrification. So, or around capital primarily, right? CIP. So I think it's totally fair for us to go in, and we can definitely do this and take this approach, which is really whittle this down to those key subject areas. If you agree with 6A, B, and C as being the priority, and that's what the outcome of the discussion, if that clicks with all of you, that's the guidance we need tonight, and we can put it together that way. And if you all feel and agree, because I largely view the work session as the work session is for the bodies to then create something, whether it's conversation or deliverables, that can guide staff. And I think that what we've struggled with, or what I'm really hopeful for in this conversation, is some clear guidance that says we'll use electrification, for example. And Praveen, thank you for sharing that perspective of those three scenarios. If we can walk out and it's research this more and come back with X, right? Or yes, we agree with that, check that box and move on. It gives us the framework to do the work. What I'm not really expecting is the bodies to make a lot of significant decisions together in this work session. My hope is that this work session can then inform the work that we do throughout the coming budget process in the coming year, and we can answer those incrementally in some ways through the work that we do. And kind of to your point, Hillary, like what are the things we keep going back to? We never, I mean, honestly, at some point, if you want to simplify it, the question that would go to council is, do you still agree we should pursue the ATV? And if you do, how do you want us to pursue it? Because basically the way we've been pursuing it is that every year we get budget guidance, we follow the budget guidance, and then we issue a letter that says, here are the unfunded things. And we just do it over, wash, rinse, and repeat, right? and it's not accomplishing the goals. And so I would definitely take the approach of leading the conversation that way. And I'm happy to do that. I think based off of sort of all of the pretty clear feedback that's come from everyone so far, and I know Chair Kaplan, you were getting ready to weigh in a minute, but that's all really helpful stuff for us that allows us to do exactly what you said, Jesse, which is to whittle it down and present it in a way that makes sense. That's why I didn't want to put slides on the screen tonight. I know, Praveen, I'm sorry for missing that expectation, misunderstanding the expectation. The reason for not doing that was exactly this, because I didn't want this to be a final product conversation. I wanted this to be something that informed us so clearly that the final product hits the mark, and this is really helpful feedback. So, but David, it looked like you wanted to chime in there.
Yeah, sure. I appreciate the input and feedback from all my colleagues, and I agree with a lot of it. I wanted to clarify, this is a 90-minute session that we have with council. Do we know the length of time?
Again, a little unclear, but yes, it looks like it on the calendar. Yeah.
Okay. I think, you know, I really like the idea of, and it's different from other work sessions, but that coming in with kind of very provocative kind of, here's the bottom line of what we need, and saying, you know, not we'll have to rephrase and clean it up, not say we don't have any clarity from you on this, but I think to come in and start with that, I mean, I think the way you've approached it is the way often work sessions that I've observed with city council on a range of topics go, where there's sort of a background, as Art said, kind of that whole, yes, we've met with the public and we're also considering them an audience, people who may not know a lot about Dash, yet it's a heavy driver of the city budget. What does that mean? But it's probably not for us, you know, for the best use of our time, because a lot of folks are familiar with it, and it does kind of then muddy what we're trying to get to, which are those key points. I wanted also to ask, you know, as I was looking at the agenda when we were starting, I was wondering if we needed to, as we've done with our board meetings, to try to put some time as to if we're going to stick with that structure, and that may be reworked, as to what the expectations of how long we're going to spend on something. If we're going to talk about a specific plan, if we want to do half on operating, half on capital, it sounds like we may need more on capital, but I realize it's going to be hard to kind of keep a body, you know, like council to that, but that may help to just kind of also show where we are putting our emphasis on things that we want to talk about. And I also think, I mean, just having watched council a lot, they do come with questions on many things. And so if we're explaining some background stuff, we may get into wandering away, maybe onto something ACPS related, or something that doesn't get us exactly to where we want to go. So do we want to have discussion points built into the agenda, as opposed to kind of having it then at the very end and want to just say, here's a question about this, we're going to take 10 minutes to discuss this, or 15 minutes, you know, and then go on to the next topic, kind of have that already built in the agenda. And that way, that will help to, I assume the mayor will run the meeting, that will help to kind of cue her, and especially if there's an opportunity to talk with her before the meeting about kind of, you know, what we're trying to get out of it. Just as we said here, we really want that, start to have that clarity between the two bodies. I think that will help if she also understands kind of where we're trying to be at the end of this. So I offer those for suggestion.
Thank you. Based on this discussion, I'm envisioning that we sort of have three, I would say, it's probably stating in the wrong way, but three content slides, if you want to put it that way. And that we get at, to me, I'm aligned with everybody, and I just want to repeat it back to you, make sure we're all hearing you the same way, that we don't really need to spend time talking about who Dash is or necessarily the plans in detail, but rather just come out the gate and say, we've got sort of three key areas. One is our sustainable operating funding, which I think is a repeat theme year over year. Our CIP, or more importantly, our state of good repair replacement process, and which ties directly into the fleet electrification / fleet expansion conversation. Am I repeating it back effectively in that sense? I mean, I think that we can even potentially have some, I don't want to call them leave behinds, but I think there's some things that we can have that have those details, but that we wouldn't go into them in that discussion, and instead, again, using Praveen's example, which I think is a really good one, which is we don't have the money as it stands right now to go electric. What do you want to do? And here are three possible scenarios of how we get there. Sorry, Praveen, your hand went back up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think my suggestion there is to make 6B 6A, because you're basically a week away from the 6-month anniversary of the budget discussion. I don't know if that's when the council wants to relitigate the budget scenario, right? Like the question that prompted this was electrification, and if I had been on council and prompted that, I would be wondering why we're not talking about that. If a lot of time gets burned on the operating budget. So that, just simple advice of give people what they ask for.
Okay.
And I wanted also, Praveen, I wasn't sure your hand was, so I wasn't sure if you were done, but also thinking about what you had said about examples of cities that may be following different paths, such as buying buses internationally. I'd like to, and maybe it's too early because this is all still being figured out, and there is a no-low grant program this year, although somewhat different. But so understanding, are there any kind of examples of where we think others in the industry are going, that may, other transit systems are going, that may help inform what we might be able to do? Are there, transit systems that are saying, gosh, we're just not going to go after federal money at all, even if there are opportunities, because it's just not meeting our needs? I'd like to, if we have examples that we can follow, be helpful to kind of know what some of that is, because that may inform what we want to do. But I understand that it's still very early and some significant policy changes.
Thank you. Art's hand went back up.
Yeah, this is a little more in the weeds of a comment, but just observing from the last year or two of budget work sessions with council, something they tend to be curious about and might be helpful to be able to answer, especially in whatever overview you do with the operating budget, is kind of what are our locked in costs versus discretionary. So the example comes up, collective bargaining, right? That's a train we put on the tracks and it's going. And there's not really a whole lot we can do about it once we've made that agreement. So because I saw you had that as future drivers, and it's important to talk about, but it might be helpful framing, or at least information on the back of your head about, like, well, of this growth over time, what's just base service and what we've already kind of committed to versus some of the more discretionary items, including service expansion. So just it comes up that they ask that, and it's kind of hard to answer in the meeting if you haven't thought of it in that framing.
That's very helpful. Thanks. Reach.
I think in a similar context, I'm wondering if it's better to steer clear of budget issues that are kind of applicable to everybody in all departments. So if we think about things like tariffs, think about the macro environment, you think about debt financing at the municipal level, all these things, and I don't know to what extent you could make a similar argument for collective bargaining, but I'm not sure how much of that is. I'm sure council's aware of it. They're going to be engaged on those topics in budget conversations. I'm not sure how much of that's unique to us, but if there is, for instance, an outsized expectation of increase on fuel costs, which are more specific to Dash, that may be an area that's worth some airtime. But I think maybe cutting down on it as we're thinking about what can we jettison, it may be better to steer clear of the things that are more widely applicable to all departments of the city as a whole.
It makes sense. Hillary.
Yeah, just kind of following up with Art saying, I think you have some really good charts that illustrate that in a very clean way. Kind of this is what we're paying for. This is, our base cost, and this is the above and beyond. So I think those would be helpful to touch up if we haven't recently. The other thing I'm just thinking about for like keeping the conversation on track after sitting through many a council meeting. I like the way Praveen framed his question, and I think it would be really nice to think about some of the questions you have in discussion and how we put this on a slide so that it's on the screen, because I think then it makes it easier to, when the conversation gets off track, to kind of bring people back, and just having that up there. So as kind of a reminder. So I would suggest maybe thinking through some of the discussion questions at the end of however we're breaking it up, but having those so that we can bring it up and kind of put it on the screen, so that we can like make sure that we're staying on track enough to get you the answers that you need by the end of the meeting.
Rish.
Just one question popped in my head as Hillary was talking. Is there a thought to providing any handouts or materials to council? And is there room for anything that we think would support the points that we're all trying to address with council, that we may not get to in the form of slides, or it would be difficult to flip back and forth, but would be useful in the form of a packet of information to make available to all attendees?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that had struck my mind, kind of along the lines of the point being made tonight about there being too much content as it is, sort of on our outline here. My thinking was that someone might want to dive into content that is not otherwise been presented. And I think I share everybody's concern. There's the time is going to be very limited, and it's going to be a challenge to kind of keep people on track. And so I do like the idea. I think at the onset, I think it's important for everyone to understand that, at least in my view, and you all can disagree with me and tell me that I'm thinking about this the wrong way. I think it's okay for there to be some loose ends that come out of this conversation, because to me, that informs us of where we should be spending our time working. Right now, we don't really have a lot of clarity on that. We get it obviously from you all, and we work through those things, but we as a body don't get to see a lot of that from council specifically. And so it would be really helpful, I think, because again, we're not going to have this amount of time, but I think there's a lot of information that we can push through future budget processes and other things that can help tie up some of those loose ends. But yeah, I mean, I'm in agreement. We do need, it is clear that 6B needs to be at the top of the list, and we'll tackle that first. We'll tackle, I think we need to tackle capital with that, because those things can go hand in hand. I mean, at the end of the day, this is something that I say a lot too. Praveen said it tonight, but I say it a lot too. Transit is environmental benefit out the gate, regardless of propulsion method. Doesn't mean that I don't believe that, the challenges around greenhouse gas emissions that are caused by diesel buses is not a problem. It is. But if we're not there and we get behind in state of repair and we start to fail and people flee the service, right, we're going backwards, and that is a real concern to me. Praveen.
Yeah, I think a message that might resonate there, Josh, is, you know, you have to do the analysis to show this, but could you claim, based on some analysis, that you can achieve more decarbonization than our base case electrification scenario by having expanded transit in Alexandria? Like, what sort of threshold would you have to show that, you know, you could beat the 2037 decarbonization goals by having more frequent, more reliable, expanded transit? Because then you know, you get into the root of where does the policy come from? The policy is not electrification for its own sake. It's to reduce community greenhouse gas emissions. So if you show the creativity that you can actually, you found a better way to do it, and it's some hybrid between electrification and expansion, that delivers the people that policy objective at a lower cost, I think that would be compelling.
That'll be a good part of our conversation in the morning, Praveen. Our team's already got the time on the schedule first thing tomorrow, so we'll be spending a lot of time talking about this stuff. That's helpful. So, Mr. Chair, I'll send it back to you. Again, I've gotten a lot of what I need out of this meeting, and I do apologize if any of you were looking for something more out of this meeting that we haven't delivered on. I want to assure you that's what we're going to do on Wednesday of next week, and this is what we're going to base the format of how we put that together is based off this conversation. But Art, I'm sorry, you popped back up. Go ahead.
Yeah, just one other comment, suggestion. I'm certainly not advocating for another slide, but I do suggest it's important to maybe spend 30 seconds in that meeting and recognize all that has happened, because these are some big hairy problems to figure out. But I certainly wouldn't want council to leave there thinking, gosh, we've failed Dash, because we have invested a lot. We have done a lot of things. We, you know, hit a ridership milestone last year. There are a lot of cool things to celebrate, and you know, certainly wouldn't want this. Don't let that morph into a dog and pony on Dash. But I think it's important to note that, you know, they've been really reliable partners, and it's been successful, and we've done a lot, so that they like to hear good things too, I suppose.
Thank you. We definitely will.
There was a question in the chat, I think, from Matt about a virtual option because of his work commitment.
I believe there will be. Yeah, Matt, we can. Beth, if you want to take a note to get some understanding, I'm not sure whether we're going to host this through Dash's webinar or the cities, but we'll get a link for you one way or the other, a panelist link.
And I know we're up against our time. I just, as a final question, Josh, to understand, have you, are you expecting to have a conversation with the mayor kind of about, or the manager about their expectations, and kind of to make sure that we're aligning with how they expect the session to run, or versus whether, you know, we will run the entire presentation, or do they have inputs that they want to give?
Yes, I'll be reaching out to the manager's office, but I needed to have this conversation with this group first before I could do that. Otherwise, I would have been potentially explaining a totally different approach.
Sure. Well, thank you all, and thank you, Josh, and your team for a very thoughtful discussion, and really engaging in the issues that are most important to Dash's future. If there is no other comments or business to come before the board, I'll ask if there's a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Move, Jesse.
Second.
second Arish. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right, meeting is adjourned.
Thanks all. Great work.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.